Besides what you've shared, what are some other gaming moments you look back on fondly?
I'm going to take this question as broadly as possible. So it won't necessarily be moments in games. It'll be things around gaming, I suppose. Starting out with the fighting fantasy books and kind of stumbling into something closer to what actual role-playing was through that. With me reading the book and the other person making the decisions and then me paging through. That was that's when I count my role-playing career or whatever starting, with playing those books together, and lending them to each other and so on. So shout out to Russell if he's out there. Buying my second proper game after the Fighting Fantasy Tiger Man cover book, which was Merp, and just sitting there and rereading and reading and rereading and reading that rulebook over and over again, and not getting it at all, but still playing it somehow and still having a good time with it. And as a result, reading and rereading The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings several times. It's funny, you look back on it now, and for such dense and capacious material as The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit and The Silmarillion are, it's a very slim book with not a huge amount in it. I think the assumption was that you were interested in The Lord of the Rings, which I was, and so you would know everything. Reading Vampire the Masquerade on the train, the day I bought it, the day it was out in the UK. We just happened to make a trip to the distributor, who also had a game shop on that particular day. But yeah, reading that on the train back and playing it that evening, and setting it in the real world around us, that's a big one. The first Vampire LARPs I ever run, entirely independent, and kind of using the very first edition of the Masquerade rules, which weren't great, but we managed somehow. Things not having to make sense in dungeons and so on, and having fun with just puns and nonsense and stupidity, which I had a retaste of playing Tunnels and Trolls the other night, but most of the time I can't find that satisfying anymore. So it's a fond memory, but not something that I think can necessarily be recreated or resurrected successfully if you've developed a more sophisticated palette for your games. The combination of a 5-year campaign of the game SLA Industries, where the entire thing had been building up to an assassination attempt on Mr. Slayer, and having worked themselves into Slayer's personal guard by taking their security clearance level all the way up, ascending in the elevator to their first meeting with Mr. Slayer, and one new player who'd just recently joined the group going, "So this is where we kill him then, is it?" in the security monitored elevator. So they were rumbled at the last moment, and so everyone was ready for them. So that was fun. The cyberpunk character having all his limbs blown off, falling into a well and drowning, that I've mentioned before. Drums in the Deep for a horror game I ran at the game club we used to run at the local school, which I've talked about before. The first sort of times I began playing games over IRC, Internet Relay Chat, primarily with other LARP people around the world, and realizing that we were role-playing with people around the world, which isn't unusual now. You can have pickup groups with people on all different continents pretty much, but that was kind of giddy at the time. House sharing, my second job with a bunch of other gamers. So we had a house full of gamers. So any evening we wanted to play a game, we could. All weekend we were playing games, and other gamer friends would come over and we would host. And I look back on that very fondly. The Legend of the Five Rings campaign, first and second edition, that I ran with those people, that was everyone was really invested and heartfelt and emotionally connected to the campaign. It probably should have stopped earlier than it did, but we were all having such a good time with it that we didn't want to let it go. Character in Cyberpunk meaning to do the dance and shoot at another character's feet, forgetting that they had loaded high explosive rounds into their revolver, and so blowing the other player's legs off, which was, interesting. Same player had been saving up all their money for ages in game and finally spent it on a $500,000 dream machine motorbike, and then ended up within that session, the first session they had the bike, using it as a glorified petrol bomb on a full ball conversion enemy. Most expensive petrol bomb ever, I think. My first paid game writing, which was a very simple D6 based RPG based on Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, written for a friend, handwritten for a friend, for which I was paying to the princely sum of £12. A charity dungeon I ran at secondary school, pure theatre of the mind, no rules. I just had a little notebook. There was a prize that people would get if they completed it. It was deadly as fuck, and even people who didn't know anything about gaming, didn't really want anything to do with gaming, got into it, and I raised, I think, £30 or £40 in the mid to late 80s doing that. 30 or 40 people turning up at my house, including new people I didn't really know but were friends of friends, to play a single tabletop game. Yeah, that was the height of Vampire fame. So yeah, those moments, and those first times being at a convention and feeling like, everyone here is into the same thing I am. This would have been 91, 92. And that felt weird, because pre-internet you really didn't have much idea of just how many people were into what you were into. So seeing hundreds and hundreds of people gathered in one place to do the thing that you love, and having something in common with everyone there, was a fantastic feeling, and that's not how I feel anymore. So I look back on that very, very fondly indeed.